When I came home after 6 weeks away, my neighbor's new shed was standing where my wife's lilacs used to grow. Grant Holloway held up a green permit card and told me I was making trouble over a few useless inches. He had no idea what was buried beneath it. 3 weeks later, County Inspector Marisol Vega stepped through the side gate beside my garage. She measured the concrete, photographed the wall, then kept walking toward Grant's electrical trench and blocked drainage channel. Grant smiled, as if the visit would prove me foolish. It did not end there that morning. To understand why, you need to know where I had been.
Look, I am just trying
My
to be a
older
good
sister
neighbor
Helen
here.
had undergone hip
just sign
surgery
this,
in another
it clears
county,
up the shed issue.
and I stayed with her until she could climb stairs safely. Before leaving, my backyard looked exactly as it had for 15 quiet years of ordinary weekends together. The narrow strip between my garage and Grant's fence was not impressive.
I have the survey.
It held a gravel path, 2 lilac bushes, and enough room for my mower. My wife, Elaine, planted those bushes during our first spring in the house. After she died, I kept them trimmed without ever moving them. That was why I stopped halfway down the driveway when I returned. The fence had shifted toward my garage. The gravel path was pinched to a narrow shoulder. One lilac was gone, the other crushed beneath fresh soil. Beyond them stood a structure with windows, siding, and an air conditioner. Grant came outside before I reached the gate. He wore a pale blue polo and carried his phone like a badge. He said the project was legal, inspected, and already paid for. Then he tapped the permit card fixed beside the door and asked whether I planned to congratulate him. I asked one question: where did you get the property line? Grant pointed at the fence. He said everybody knew fences marked ownership. When I told him that fences sometimes drifted from deed lines, his smile tightened. He said I had been gone, and the crew had followed obvious facts. I did not yell. I did not touch the shed or threaten to tear it down. Years earlier, I had worked on a survey field crew, carrying stakes, checking notes, and locating monuments for licensed professionals. I knew enough to distrust confidence, especially when confidence wore new siding and paint. I also knew what I was not. I was not a licensed surveyor, and my memory could not establish a legal boundary. So I walked the narrow strip slowly, took photographs, and wrote down the date, time, weather, and everything Grant said before either of us changed the story later. Near the corner of the concrete slab, something orange caught the light. Only a curved edge showed beneath dried mud and gravel. I crouched without touching it. Grant asked whether I had lost a coin. I recognized the shape, but I needed proof before giving it a name aloud yet. It looked like the protective cap used over a survey monument. If that was true, the concrete had been poured against the marker itself. But a damaged cap could be old, misplaced, or unrelated. I photographed it from 3 angles and left it exactly where I found it that afternoon. Grant followed me toward my back door. His voice softened. He said construction had been stressful and offered to replace the lilac, widen the gravel, and install a nicer fence. All he wanted was a neighborly signature confirming I accepted the new line. He already had the paper printed out. That detail mattered more than the offer. People do not usually prepare boundary acknowledgments after building, unless someone has warned them about the boundary. I asked when the document had been drafted. Grant glanced at his phone and said his lender liked clean records. Then he changed subjects at once. I refused to sign. He called me emotional and said Elaine would have preferred peace. That was the first moment I nearly lost my temper. He had never known my wife. Using her name to pressure me felt worse than losing the grass. Still, I said, send the site plan. Grant laughed as though I had asked for a classified document. He said the county would not issue a permit without checking everything. Then he pointed at the green card again. The card was real. The permit number was visible. That certainty was his shield, and every neighbor saw it. By sunset, 3 people had texted me. One suggested I let it go, another said Grant had improved the property, the third asked whether I was planning a lawsuit. Grant had turned the shed into a public story before I had even opened my closing folder upstairs that night alone. Inside that folder was the survey from the day Elaine and I bought the house. The drawing was old and creased, but it showed the recorded distance from my garage wall to the boundary. I measured the remaining space outside. Even allowing for error, something was seriously wrong there now. I called Nora Patel, a licensed surveyor whose company had reviewed several repair sites for me years before. I told her I needed an independent boundary survey, not a favor and not a conclusion. She asked whether construction had covered any visible monument. I sent the orange photographs immediately afterward. Nora called back within 5 minutes. She did not say the shed was mine or Grant was guilty. She said only that nobody should disturb the orange cap before her crew arrived. Then she asked one question that changed the whole dispute. Did the permit site plan show that marker? Nora's question stayed with me long after the call ended. A permit could be genuine and still rely on a bad drawing, but I needed facts before assuming that. I carried the closing folder to my kitchen table, flattened the survey, and began comparing every measurement I could verify myself. The drawing showed the garage wall, the rear corner pin, and a bearing line running north toward the street. It also showed 7 feet 4 inches from the garage foundation to the recorded boundary. Outside, the distance to Grant's new fence was barely 4 feet at its widest point now. That did not prove where the legal line stood today, but it proved the fence had moved. I found photographs from Elaine's last spring, including one where she knelt beside the lilacs. The old fence appeared behind her, farther from the garage than the new posts Grant had installed there. I printed the picture and placed it beside the survey. Then I opened a waterproof notebook from my former field days and created a timeline. I listed when I left, when neighbors reported construction noise, when the fence disappeared, when the concrete arrived, and when Grant requested my signature afterward. Working on survey crews had taught me that memory was useful only until records arrived. People remembered straight fences that had always leaned. They remembered markers several feet from their true locations. Most errors were ordinary, not malicious. That was why I wrote what I knew and what remained uncertain. The next morning, Grant sent a photograph of the acknowledgement form. It described the new fence as mutually accepted and called the shed location undisputed. The language was too polished for something drafted after a casual conversation. I saved the image, exported the message thread, and answered with 6 words. "Please send the approved site plan," Grant replied almost immediately. He said permits were public records and told me to stop bothering him. 10 minutes later, he wrote again, offering to pay for a replacement lilac if I signed before Friday. I saved both messages without arguing about either one. Helen called while I was scanning the closing documents. She heard the strain in my voice and asked whether I intended to surrender simply because Grant spoke louder. I told her I wanted peace. She reminded me that peace required consent, while surrender required only silence from the injured person. Her words made me think about a dispute from my childhood. My father and his brother had fought over a farm lane until neither family attended the other's funerals. I had learned the wrong lesson from them. I believed avoiding conflict prevented damage, even when avoidance rewarded wrongdoing for years. After the call, I visited the county permit portal. Grant had been right about one thing. The permit existed. It had a valid number, an issue date, and an assigned inspection track. The public summary called the project a detached accessory storage structure. Nothing in the summary mentioned an office. It also listed no permanent electrical service. I looked through my kitchen window at the air conditioner mounted beside Grant's shed. A conduit entered the wall below it. Fresh soil crossed the yard toward his house. The permit had not prevented construction, but it had created a standard for comparison. The portal allowed me to request the full file, including the approved drawing, contractor information, and inspection notes. I submitted the request and attached Nora's survey appointment. Then I emailed Grant one time. I asked him not to alter the fence, slab, orange cap, or drainage before documentation was complete. His reply arrived after midnight. He accused me of threatening his family's privacy and said any person entering his yard would be trespassing. I answered that Nora would work from lawful access points and follow professional procedure. I copied nothing to neighbors. I posted nothing online. I kept building record. By Thursday, Grant had started telling people I was trying to steal his improvement. One neighbor repeated his claim that my survey was outdated and inaccurate. I explained nothing beyond saying a licensed surveyor was coming. The less I argued, the more Grant filled silence with statements I could document. Nora's crew arrived Friday morning with a robotic instrument, stakes, and copies of recorded plats. She introduced herself to Grant and explained that she would locate the boundary using monuments and records, not either owner's preference. Grant stood beside the shed door and demanded that she begin with his fence. Nora ignored the demand. She began at the street, tied her measurements to 2 established points, then worked toward the lots. Grant followed her until she asked him to remain clear of the equipment. I stayed near garage, resisting the urge to interpret each movement as a verdict for me. At the orange cap, Nora stopped. She brushed gravel away with a soft hand tool and photographed the area before touching anything else. The cap was damaged, but the metal monument beneath it remained. One edge of Grant's slab had been poured so close that concrete trapped the cap sideways. She did not announce a conclusion. She marked the point, checked her instrument, and continued toward the rear corner. Grant asked 3 times whether the fence was correct. Nora gave the same answer each time. She would speak after completing the survey. Then the county emailed me the site plan. The county email arrived while Nora was still working behind the garage. I opened the site plan on my phone, then enlarged it until the dimensions were readable. The drawing showed a 10 by 12 storage shed, positioned 8 feet from my boundary, with no electricity, plumbing, insulation, or foundation. The structure outside my window was nothing like that drawing. It was 14 feet wide and 20 feet long, with 2 windows, finished siding, a wall-mounted air conditioner, and a concrete slab. Even before Nora completed her measurements, the permit file and the building contradicted each other in sight. I forwarded the plan to Nora without offering my interpretation. She glanced at it, photographed the screen for her records, and continued checking the rear monument. Grant watched us from his patio. When I looked up, he raised the permit card and shouted, "Do you believe me now, at last?" Before I could answer, Grant walked to the side fence and spoke loudly enough for 2 neighbors to hear. He said county had approved every detail, my paperwork meant nothing, and a man who repaired lawn equipment should not pretend to understand construction rules better than the officials involved anyway. Grant had found the argument he wanted. He was no longer defending a shed, he was defending authority, paperwork, and the assumption that approval erased every question. I had seen that tactic on construction sites before. People waived one valid document as if it made every later decision valid too. Nora finished at the rear corner, returned to the orange cap, and ran the measurements again. Then she checked the garage wall and both fence lines. She asked me for the closing survey, compared its recorded distances with her data, and finally drove a white stake beside the shed's corner. Grant stepped closer and demanded to know what the stake meant. Nora told him it marked the boundary location produced by her fieldwork, subject to the survey. He asked whether she could be wrong. She said surveys carried responsibility, which was why she checked control points instead of trusting fences. Then she showed us the number neither of us could argue with. The slab crossed the measured line by 34 inches at its widest point. One wall stood on my property, and the concrete had trapped the monument beneath its edge. The fence had been moved toward the garage. For several seconds, Grant said nothing. Then he claimed the monument must have shifted when the fence was replaced. Nora explained that the cap was damaged, but the metal rod beneath it remained consistent with the recorded plat and her control measurements. Moving the rod without disturbing soil was unlikely. I asked Nora whether the survey proved Grant intentionally crossed the line. She said no. It proved where the line was and where the building stood. Intent would depend on records, messages, witnesses, and what anyone knew before construction. Her answer mattered because truth weakens when people claim beyond evidence supports. Grant seized on that distinction. He told the neighbors Nora had admitted she could not prove wrongdoing. Then he photographed himself beside the permit card and posted that a surveyor had found only a minor fence discrepancy. By evening, his version of the result had traveled farther than Nora's words. The records office sent a second message that afternoon. It included the application Grant had signed. Under contractor, the form said owner-builder. Under project description, it repeated detached storage. The sketch placed the shed near the rear corner, nowhere near the side boundary or the monument we had found. I enlarged the sketch and saw another detail. A handwritten note beside the proposed shed read no utilities, yet Grant had run conduit from his house, installed cooling, and furnished the interior as an office. The permit had not approved what stood outside. It approved a smaller structure elsewhere. I called the permit desk and asked a narrow question. Did approval of the application certify the property line? The clerk said no. The county reviewed the plan for code requirements, but the owner remained responsible for location and setbacks. A permit allowed the approved project, not proof of ownership. That sentence dismantled Grant's strongest claim. The permit existed, but it did not move the boundary, approve a larger office, or erase unlisted electrical work. Still, I knew a contradiction on paper would not produce a remedy. Someone from the county had to compare the approved project with the one. Nora returned the next morning with her survey and photographs. She had marked the boundary, the shifted fence, the slab, and the 34-inch encroachment. She included a note stating that the monument appeared intact beneath the damaged cap. Her report made no accusation. It did not need one. I sent the survey, permit drawing, application, and photographs to building services. I asked for an inspection of the structure as built. Within an hour, Grant sent me a message. He said bringing inspectors onto his property would be harassment, and he promised to hold me responsible for dollars they cost. Before sunset, Marisol called. She had compared the survey with the permit and wanted to see the site. I explained access and said I would not authorize entry beyond my property. Marisol said she could begin from my side. Then Grant made the mistake of inviting her farther into yard. Marisol arrived Tuesday morning in a county sedan, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a blue clipboard. She reviewed Nora's survey beside my garage before approaching the shed. Grant came outside smiling, holding the green permit card as if it were a courtroom verdict already delivered in his favor. I opened the side gate and showed Marisol the white stake marking the surveyed boundary. From that position, she could see the slab crossing onto my land. She photographed the stake, the orange cap, and the concrete, before asking either of us a single question about blame or intent. Grant objected immediately. He said Marisol had no right to inspect anything beyond the line and accused me of arranging an ambush. Marisol answered calmly that she was documenting visible conditions from property I controlled. Then Grant laughed, unlocked his gate, and invited her to inspect everything herself that morning. He wanted a performance. He opened the shed, switched on the lights, and pointed toward the finished walls, the desk, and the air conditioner. He said the county would see professional work, not violations. Marisol stepped inside, looked around once, and asked where the approved electrical inspection sticker was located. Grant's smile changed. He said the electrician had handled everything and that paperwork sometimes arrived late. Marisol compared the permit file on her tablet with the room around us. The approved plan described an unconditioned storage shed. The actual building contained outlets, lighting, insulation, cooling, and office furniture throughout, inside. She measured the exterior with a laser, 14 feet by 20, exactly as Nora had estimated. The approved dimensions were 10 by 12. Marisol photographed each wall, the slab thickness, and the door orientation. Grant insisted construction changes were normal and automatically protected by approval once work had already begun. Marisol asked who installed the wiring. Grant named a company but could not produce an invoice, inspection request, or contractor number. She followed the conduit outside to fresh soil running toward his house. A narrow trench crossed the yard without warning tape visible near the exposed section beside the foundation. She did not touch the wiring or declare it dangerous. She photographed what she could see and explained that an electrical inspector would determine compliance. Grant turned toward me and said, "This was exactly why neighbors should settle privately." Marisol wrote his statement down without responding to the pressure tactic. Outside, Marisol studied the ground behind the shed. Grant had stacked retaining blocks along the rear edge and redirected 2 downspouts toward the narrow channel between our yards. The original swale was partly filled with soil, gravel, and construction debris left from the foundation work several weeks before I returned. I showed her photographs taken before I left for Helen's surgery. The pictures showed a shallow drainage path curving behind the lilacs. In Marisol's new photographs, that path ended against blocks and compacted fill. She asked whether water had collected near my garage after the recent construction work was completed. I told her I had not been home long enough to know. Grant answered for me, saying drainage was unrelated and his yard had always sloped that way. Marisol asked for photographs from before construction. Grant said he had none because normal people did not document their dirt like evidence. That answer drew no visible reaction from her. She walked farther into Grant's backyard, checking the retaining blocks, the trench, and the distance from the shed to his house. Each step widened the inspection beyond the boundary dispute he had expected to settle easily before breakfast that same quiet morning. At the back corner, Marisol found a small plastic drain outlet emerging beneath the siding. Grant said it was only condensation from the air conditioner. She noted that the permit approved no mechanical equipment and asked where the line discharged. Grant suddenly stopped offering explanations and asked whether inspection was over. It was not. Marisol returned to the permit card, photographed both sides, and compared its number with the file on her tablet. The card belonged to the approved storage shed, but no final inspection had been recorded. Grant had displayed an active permit as though it were completion certificate already. Marisol explained that an issued permit authorized specified work. It did not certify unreviewed changes, establish property ownership, or approve concealed systems. Grant asked whether she planned to shut down his office. She said other departments would review their portions before any formal order was issued to him in writing. Grant looked at me as if I had personally created every requirement she named. He said my complaint had opened a war neither of us could afford. I answered that I had requested one inspection of one structure built across one verified line after he refused documentation repeatedly from me. Marisol gave neither of us a speech. She placed a notice on the shed, stating that occupancy and additional work required review. Then she requested Grant's contractor records, electrical information, foundation details, and any photographs taken before the concrete pour. Grant said the crew had handled all of that properly. As she left, Marisol paused beside the orange cap and looked again at the concrete pressed against it. She said the county file contained a construction photograph uploaded before the slab inspection request. In that image, the marker was still fully visible. Someone had seen it before pouring began there. 2 days after Marisol posted the notice, the county sent separate letters. Building services would review the shed, electrical work, and drainage, while the boundary encroachment remained a private civil matter unless Grant and I reached an agreement or obtained a court order. Grant read only the sentence he wanted. By noon, he had told neighbors the county admitted I was wrong. He stood beside his mailbox explaining that officials had called the dispute civil, which he translated into permission. He left out the occupancy notice, electrical review, drainage referral, and 34 inches shown on Nora's signed survey entirely. Grant then arrived at my door carrying an envelope. Inside was an offer to buy the disputed strip for $500, plus a confidentiality agreement covering the construction, inspection, and our communications. He called it generous because the ground was useless to me anyway, now and forever after this. The agreement did more than transfer land. It required me to withdraw complaints, accept the fence, release Grant from restoration costs, and confirm that no drainage problem existed. He had packaged silence, ownership, and future damage into one neighborly payment smaller than Nora's survey invoice alone that week for me. I returned the envelope unsigned. Grant asked whether I understood how expensive lawyers could become. I said I understood what he was asking me to certify without evidence. He stared at me for several seconds, then said I had chosen the hard way for both our families from that point. The next morning, a county officer appeared at my garage. Grant had filed a complaint claiming I operated an illegal commercial repair business in a residential zone, stored hazardous fuel, and blocked emergency access. The timing was obvious, but I did not accuse the officer of helping Grant retaliate publicly. I opened every cabinet, showed my home occupation registration, produced receipts for approved waste disposal, and explained that I repaired only portable equipment by appointment. The officer measured clearances, photographed extinguishers, checked the fuel locker, and found no violation requiring action against me during that thorough inspection at my property. Even so, his visit cost me half a day of work. 2 customers saw the county vehicle and postponed appointments. One asked whether I was being shut down. Grant had discovered something useful. A complaint did not need to succeed to create suspicion, lost time, and embarrassment for me. Helen called that evening after hearing what happened. She wanted me to contact an attorney immediately. I told her I was documenting the retaliation and waiting for the county reviews. She said patience was admirable until someone began using it as permission to continue hurting you without consequence or resistance. I understood her warning, but the evidence still needed order. Nora could prove the line. Marisol could document the permit mismatch. Electrical and stormwater staff had separate authority. If I mixed their roles or exaggerated findings, Grant could make procedure look like personal revenge instead of accountability for his choices. 3 nights later, a hard summer storm moved over our neighborhood. Rain struck the roof in sheets and filled the gutters within minutes. I went to the garage after hearing water slap against the foundation, a sound I had never heard beside that wall in 15 years of living there. Water was pooling where the gravel path once drained toward the rear swale. Grant's retaining blocks formed a low dam, and runoff from his redirected downspouts poured toward my garage. The level climbed across the crushed lilac bed until muddy water touched the bottom edge of my siding before receding. I recorded video from my doorway, keeping the camera on the water path, downspout discharge, blocked channel, and time displayed on my phone. I did not enter Grant's yard. I placed temporary sandbags along my foundation and called the county emergency drainage number for guidance that same stormy night immediately. A stormwater engineer named Luis Mercer arrived the following afternoon. The water had dropped, but silt lines remained on my siding and along the concrete. Luis compared old photographs with current grades, inspected from authorized locations, and documented that construction fill had interrupted the shared drainage path between both properties. His preliminary note did not declare Grant responsible for every drop of water. It said the altered swale and redirected discharge required correction and further review. That careful language helped me more than any angry accusation could have. It connected visible damage to documented site changes professionally and fairly enough. Grant responded by accusing me of manufacturing the flood with sandbags. He emailed Marisol, Luis, and several supervisors, demanding my complaint be dismissed as harassment. Attached to his message was a photograph from the construction crew, intended to show proper grading before they finished the project behind his new shed. Instead, the photograph showed the orange cap standing fully exposed beside wooden forms before concrete was poured. A tape measure crossed the ground, and one worker pointed directly toward the marker. The image had a date, time, and company watermark from 3 days before the slab appeared on my property. Marisol called me after receiving Grant's email. She said the photograph raised a question the permit file could not answer alone. Someone on the crew had noticed the marker before the pour. The county now needed the original image, job records, and the name of whoever directed work to continue. Marisol traced the company watermark to Pike Outdoor Structures, a small crew based 2 towns away. Its foreman, Owen Pike, answered her first call, but became cautious when she mentioned the orange marker. He said Grant had approved every location decision and asked whether the county planned to blame him. Marisol told him the review concerned records, not assumptions. She requested the original photograph, contract, change orders, invoices, and messages about layout. Owen agreed to preserve everything, but refused an interview without his employer present. That hesitation showed fear, not guilt, and Marisol treated the distinction carefully from the beginning. The company owner called Grant before responding. Within an hour, Grant emailed the county, accusing Owen of changing his story to avoid responsibility. He claimed every worker had received the approved site plan and insisted no one had ever raised a boundary concern. That statement created a testable fact immediately. Owen finally met Marisol and Luis at the county office with his employer and an attorney. He brought a tablet containing the job folder. The first layout photograph showed the orange cap. The second showed a string line following the relocated fence rather than the marker. The third showed concrete. When Marisol asked why the string ignored the monument, Owen opened a message thread. His own text to Grant read, "Found a survey pin near the form. Please confirm setback before pour." A photograph followed. 12 minutes later, Grant replied, "Fence is the line. Keep schedule. Pour today as planned." Owen explained that Grant had moved the fence before the crew arrived. The approved sketch lacked bearings, monument references, and a certified survey. Because Grant signed as owner-builder, Owen believed location responsibility remained with him. Owen admitted the crew should have stopped anyway once the marker appeared beside their forms. He did not ask for immunity, and none was offered. Owen signed a statement accepting responsibility for continuing work after identifying uncertainty. He also provided payroll records proving Pike Outdoor Structures supplied labor, equipment, and supervision. That directly contradicted the permit application listing Grant as the owner-builder for the project. Marisol forwarded the records to the county permit supervisor. The supervisor discovered that Grant had used an outside expediter named Mason Vale to submit the application. Mason had checked boxes stating no contractor, no utilities, and no grading changes, although his invoice described coordination with builder, electrician, and concrete crew. One false box could have been clerical. 3 false boxes matching unreviewed work suggested a method. The supervisor searched Mason's recent filings and found several owner-builder permits connected to paid crews. Most were compliant, but 4 lacked final inspections, and 2 contained unexplained changes after approval by county staff members. The finding did not prove a conspiracy, and Marisol refused to describe one. It did show that the intake process trusted declarations without checking contractor records available elsewhere in the county system. A shortcut designed for simple homeowner projects had become a door that experienced applicants could push open quietly. Grant's attorney responded before the county finished reviewing Mason's files. He argued that the shed could be legalized through a setback variance and amended permit. He described the encroachment as accidental, the electrical work as unfinished, and the drainage change as temporary landscaping. He blamed the crew for every decision. The variance application changed the pressure immediately. Grant posted a notice near the street and told neighbors the county routinely approved minor adjustments. He claimed I wanted a structure destroyed over a technical mistake. Several people who had supported me began asking why relocation mattered if paperwork could solve it. I understood the appeal. Moving the shed would cost money and damage a building that could physically be lifted. But a variance granted after construction would place Grant's wall permanently on my land unless I transferred ownership. Zoning relief could not give one neighbor title to another neighbor's property forever. I hired attorney Dana Brooks for a limited consultation. She confirmed the county could decide code compliance and variance questions, but not erase my boundary rights through an administrative shortcut. She advised me to submit evidence in sequence, avoid demands beyond documented harm, and separate property remedies from permit consequences. Dana also warned me that Grant's messages proved knowledge of the marker, but not every motive his critics might imagine. We would not call him corrupt, claim Mason bribed anyone, or suggest the crew planned an encroachment. We would show what each person knew, did, signed, and later denied clearly. At the county review meeting, Marisol arranged the evidence by date. The approved plan came first. Nora's survey came second. Then came the construction photograph, Owen's warning, Grant's reply, contractor payroll, Mason's invoice, and the inspection findings. Each item answered a different excuse without asking the audience to guess anything. Grant watched the presentation without interrupting until Owen's message appeared. Then he said the reply meant only that the crew should follow the fence shown by Mason. Marisol displayed the approved sketch beside the job photograph. The sketch placed the shed elsewhere. Mason's line had never matched either approved location. The review officer scheduled a formal hearing on the variance, corrective orders, and permit record. Grant left claiming the hearing would vindicate him. Before he reached the door, Dana handed me his application. On its final page, he had sworn the encroachment was unavoidable. The messages said otherwise quite clearly. The hearing room was smaller than Grant expected, and more crowded than I wanted. Folding chairs lined the back wall, neighbors filled every row, and 4 county departments sat at separate tables. Grant arrived with his attorney, a leather binder, and the same green permit card he carried before proudly. Marisol sat beside Luis Mercer and the electrical reviewer. Nora waited with her signed survey. Owen sat near his employer, looking exhausted. Dana placed one narrow folder in front of me and reminded me that the hearing was not about winning an argument. It was about proving a sequence clearly. The review officer opened by separating 3 questions. Where was the legal boundary? Did the structure match the approved permit? What remedy was proportionate? Grant's attorney objected that the county had no power over private ownership. The officer agreed, then added that the county controlled permits, setbacks, utilities, and drainage. Grant spoke first. He said the fence had stood for years, every worker relied on it, and no reasonable owner would suspect a buried marker near an old post. He described me as a grieving widower who had become attached to a strip of ground and turned confusion into retaliation. His attorney displayed photographs of the completed shed and emphasized its cost, quality, and appearance. He called relocation wasteful and asked for a variance that would preserve the building. He also offered to purchase the encroached land, as though my refusal to sell transformed his decision into my unreasonable demand. Nora answered the first question without discussing Grant's motives. She explained the control points, recorded plat, intact metal monument, closing survey, and measurements. Her signed drawing showed the slab crossing 34 inches onto my property. The shifted fence did not match either the monument or the recorded boundary line. Grant's attorney asked whether fences sometimes become accepted boundaries. Nora said legal doctrines depended on facts and jurisdiction, neither of which she had been retained to decide. Her assignment was location. The structure crossed the measured line. Whether Grant could acquire rights later was a separate question for another forum entirely. Marisol addressed the second question. She placed the approved site plan beside her inspection photographs. The plan showed a 10 by 12 storage shed without utilities, positioned 8 feet from the boundary. The photographs showed a 14 by 20 conditioned office on a slab, with wiring, cooling, and altered drainage. The electrical reviewer confirmed no inspection had been requested for the buried line, outlets, lighting, or cooling equipment. Luis then showed before and after photographs of the swale. He explained that fill, blocks, and redirected downspouts had changed runoff patterns and contributed to water collecting beside my garage wall there. Then Owen's message appeared on the screen, found a survey pin near the form. Please confirm setback before pour. Grant's reply followed beneath it. Fence is the line. Keep schedule. Pour today. The room became silent, not because the words were dramatic, but because they removed the excuse of ignorance. Grant said he had believed the fence and thought the marker belonged to an abandoned utility. Dana asked why his permit drawing placed the shed somewhere else. He answered that Mason handled the paperwork. The officer then displayed Mason's invoice, describing coordination with builder, electrician, and crew before construction began. Grant's attorney argued that mistakes could be corrected through amended plans. The officer agreed that some mistakes could. She asked whether a variance existed to transfer private land without consent, excuse concealed electrical work, or approve drainage damage after the fact. No representative answered yes to any of those questions. When my turn came, Dana asked what I wanted. I said I wanted the slab removed from my property, the shed relocated inside Grant's lot, the drainage restored, and the electrical work inspected. I requested survey costs, reasonable restoration expenses, and protection against further retaliation through complaints against my garage. The officer asked whether I wanted every unapproved structure in Grant's yard demolished. I said no. The retaining blocks could be corrected, the shed could be lifted rather than destroyed, and lawful work could remain after review. I did not want his family punished beyond the harm Grant had created. Grant looked surprised. He had prepared to fight a demand for total destruction because that would make me appear vindictive. A limited remedy left him with fewer places to hide. It preserved what could be made lawful while refusing to make his deadline, expense, or embarrassment more important than ownership. The review officer denied the variance request. She explained that setback relief could not legalize construction placed on another owner's land without permission, especially after a visible marker prompted a warning. She ordered the county to prepare corrective notices for location, electrical review, occupancy, and drainage restoration with firm deadlines. She also referred Mason's filings and Pike's permit classification for separate review, making clear that Owen's cooperation did not erase his crew's responsibility. Grant would receive appeal rights and time to comply. Nothing happened instantly. Accountability entered the record, where confidence could no longer rewrite what each document proved clearly. Outside the hearing room, Grant asked why I had not demanded that everything be torn down. I told him I wanted my land back, my garage protected, and the rules applied. I did not need his family ruined. I needed him to stop treating restraint as permission to take more. The corrective orders gave Grant 30 days to submit plans and 90 days to finish the work. He appealed nothing. 2 weeks after the hearing, a structural moving crew arrived with steel beams, hydraulic jacks, and a flatbed prepared to lift the shed without destroying it completely. That morning, quietly, Grant watched from his patio while the crew separated the office from the slab. The process was slower and less dramatic than demolition, which suited me. Walls stayed intact, windows survived, and the building moved 16 feet deeper into his yard, beyond the setback shown on the corrected plan that week. The concrete crossing my boundary was cut into sections and removed. Underneath it, Nora found the orange survey cap bent, but still attached to the monument. She documented its condition before a replacement cap was installed, then marked the restored line with 2 low protective posts for future reference there. Grant paid Nora's invoice, the removal costs, and the expense of repairing the gravel path. He also covered the damaged siding on my garage after the stormwater review confirmed that redirected runoff had contributed to the staining. Dana negotiated those payments without pretending every disagreement required a courtroom battle either. The lilacs could not be replaced exactly. One had been crushed beyond saving, and the second suffered root damage. Grant bought 2 mature plants from the same nursery Elaine once used. I planted them myself, not as substitutes for memory, but as proof that damaged ground could support life again. Electrical inspectors required Grant to expose part of the buried line, add proper protection, and obtain a final approval before using the shed as an office. Luis required the swale reopened, the downspouts redirected, and the retaining blocks reset. The notice remained posted until every correction passed inspection in writing. Owen and Pike Outdoor Structures received penalties for continuing after discovering the marker and for working under the wrong permit classification. Owen kept his job because he preserved records, testified accurately, and accepted responsibility. Cooperation reduced consequences, but it did not erase the decision to pour despite uncertainty that day. Mason Vale's other permits underwent review. Most required no action, but 2 owners were ordered to schedule missing inspections and 1 contractor declaration was corrected. The county found no evidence of bribery. What it found was simpler and more believable, a process built to trust forms without comparing available records. The permit supervisor proposed a new rule for accessory buildings close to property lines. Before concrete could be poured, applicants had to upload dated photographs showing survey markers or obtain location verification from a qualified professional. Inspectors could reject images that did not clearly match the approved site plan submitted. Another change linked building, zoning, electrical, and stormwater notes inside one shared file. A warning entered by one department would appear for the others before final approval. Owner-builder applications were also checked against contractor registrations and invoices when outside crews appeared during inspections at active residential construction sites in progress. The county added neighbor notice before setback variances involving a shared boundary. That reform mattered most to me because silence had allowed the problem to harden under concrete. Future neighbors would learn about proposed exceptions before construction, when disagreement could still be solved with measurements instead of moving crews later. Grant's apology came after the last inspection, not during a public meeting. He stood beside the restored gravel path and said he had known the marker raised a question. He admitted choosing schedule, cost, and pride over stopping to verify it. He did not ask me to excuse him immediately. I told him his apology mattered because it named the choice, rather than calling everything confusion. I also told him trust would return, if it returned, through repeated behavior instead of one conversation. Grant nodded. For once, he did not explain what he had intended or what others had done. We never became close friends. We exchanged greetings, shared weather warnings, and kept our work on our own sides. That was enough. Boundaries are not failures of community. Clear boundaries make community possible, because kindness has meaning only when nobody mistakes it for permission to take what restraint leaves unguarded. At the county training office, Marisol later used one photograph from our case. It showed the orange cap half buried beneath concrete beside the crew's string line. She told new inspectors that small evidence should never be ignored simply because a larger structure looked finished, expensive, professionally presented, and complete. At home, I placed a low metal ring around the restored monument so mower wheels could not strike it. The new lilacs grew beside the gravel path. Elaine's original plants were gone, but the space no longer looked stolen. It looked repaired, which felt quieter and more honest than victory. 4 months later, Grant knocked on my door holding a planting sketch. He wanted to add a row of evergreens near the rear boundary and asked whether I would review the survey with him before he ordered anything. The question was ordinary. That was exactly why it mattered to me. A permit cannot turn assumption into ownership, and confidence cannot move a property line. Sometimes the smallest evidence is the thing someone tried hardest not to see. When a quiet person asks for proof, listen before concrete makes the mistake expensive. And when truth draws a line, respect it early.